He was having an affair with Prudence Farrow at the time that his wife went missing. And Robert Durst does admit to saying that he started this affair in the fall of 1981. Remember, Kathy Durst disappears in February of 1982. And when asked on cross about whether or not he told Prudence Farrow that he called her and said that he wouldn't be available for a few days around the time Kathy disappeared, let's just play his response.
Since you're the one who agreed that you made the statement you won't be hearing from me for a while, can you explain what that meant?
I don't remember making any such statement.
Well, you remembered making the statement in 2015, correct?
2015.
2015, I asked you about the statement, and you remembered it making it then. You're now saying, I have no memory of having made that statement.
I don't remember making the statement. And I don't remember discussing it in 2015.
Well, you just heard the statement, correct? You heard it.
I saw the transcript, yes.
No, you just heard it. That was your voice saying, yeah, I remember that, correct?
I thought that was something I said to Andrew.
No, Mr. Durst, this is a statement that you made to me in the 2015 New Orleans interview. Do you understand that?
Don't remember making the statement to you. I never said anything like that to Prudence Farrow.
So here's my question. If you made the statement, Mr. Durst, would you agree that that would appear to be a very damaging statement for you to have made?
No.
Would you agree, Mr. Durst, that the statement implies that you're going to be busy involved in something that's going to prevent you from talking to Prudence Farrow, and that this is right before your wife disappears?
I have no idea what the statement implies.
Durst tells Lewin he doesn't remember ever making that statement or that phone call to Prudence Farrow, but prosecutor got in some of those strong points, like you said, towards motive, saying, didn't Prudence tell you she would leave you, not be with you, if you were still married to Kathy Durst? Of course, Robert Durst denying all that, Michael.
Yeah, Chanley, all of this is coming together pretty well now for Lewin. Stand by for a second, because I want to bring in my guest for this hour, Adam Johnson. He is a criminal defense attorney. Adam, quickly, first of all, I don't even know how at this point a jury can even believe anything that comes out of Durst's mouth, right? I think Lewin's done a fantastic job of showing that whatever comes out of his mouth really is something that pertains to that particular moment. We really don't know what the truth is, but I think now it's fair to say he's bringing in a lot of different factors that he's been proving over the last 43 days or so and really bringing it together nicely.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think he's also effective in the sense that he's pushing this in the direction, because there are so many facts and so many days of testimony and so many complicated circumstances surrounding all of the years and the events. He's able to say, if you believe somebody like Chavin, then we've achieved our burden in this case. So you can forget about everything else. You don't have to remember every single lie from Durst's mouth. If you believe Chavin, we've met our burden. And so as much as he's in the weeds cross-examining Durst through all this time and making him look every which way, he's also at the same time effectively presenting an easier argument to the jury.
All right, Chanley, quickly, we're expecting to go back to that courtroom in about 5 or 10 minutes or so. When we go back, do we have any sense of just how much longer Lewin expects to go?
For his entire cross-examination, of course, the judge will end the day at the usual time, but we're expecting Robert Durst to still be under cross-examination a week from now. Remember, here in California, court is dark on Friday, so it's only a 4-day week, but we do expect him to still be under questioning next Monday to wrap it up. And of course, we'll see if the defense calls any more witnesses after that, but unlikely.
All right, Chanley, thank you so much for that report. Great to have you out in L.A. I'm going to let you go so you can get back into that courtroom for when they get started up again. Adam Johnson, stand by, because we're going to take a break right now. And, of course, as soon as Robert Durst gets back on the stand, we'll get you back into that courtroom in Los Angeles. And also up ahead, we'll get you up to speed on day 4 of the federal trial of singer R. Kelly. The jury heard some tough testimony from one of his alleged victims in that sex trafficking case. So keep it right here on Court TV, your front row seat to justice.
Mr. Durst, I know you have said that you did not give Susan money to keep her quiet. Is that correct?
Correct.
Let me ask you something. I want you to assume for a moment that Susan had damaging evidence that you had murdered your wife. If that were the case, you agree, you would have certainly given her money whenever she asked for it, correct?
Overruled. Overruled.
If Susan, this is one of these hypotheticals. I did not murder my wife. Susan would not have had evidence that I murdered my wife. And if Susan wanted that money from me, she would ask me to give her money.
All right, they are on a break out there in Los Angeles County in the Jinx murder trial. As soon as they get going, we're going to get you out there live. They should be back in the next 5 minutes or so. And what we've been watching today really is getting down to the nitty-gritty of the case. And I want to bring in my guest for this hour, criminal defense attorney Adam Johnson. And Adam, you know, as I watch what's going on, it's as if I'm watching two people who think they're the smartest people in the room going at each other. You've got Durst, who's still sharp as a tack, trying to get his little bit of testimony, his story in, oftentimes not answering the question. We still have Prosecutor Lewin throwing out those confounding hypotheticals, which are really just another form of testifying on his behalf, giving information to this jury. I want to get your assessment of what we've been seeing this afternoon.
Yeah, I think you brought up a good analogy earlier to the boxing match. Certainly getting in the lower body blows. I think for any normal person by now, they would be worn down. They would be at their wits' end. You would see that in certain displays of their affect and their demeanor. But Robert Durst is a very unique person. For one thing, he has a remarkable facility for memory, and he also does not present any kinds of outward emotional displays when he's caught in a lie overtly in front of a room full of people, and not just a room full of people, but in his own criminal jury trial. So it's a very unique situation overall.
You know, you say that, but I don't know if I agree. I think there have been a couple of times today, specifically, where he said things and he's been caught a little bit in a lie. One of them was, he said when he was talking to Nick Shaven, he said, "How could I run away real quickly if I'm in a wheelchair?" And then, of course, he's reminded by Lewin, "You weren't really in a wheelchair, you had a walker." And he's like, well, then he hesitates for a long time. Now, he's been doing that throughout the trial, but there's been a couple of times he's been caught and he actually hesitates. And I'm wondering if that might be having an effect on this jury.
It may be. And I think, again, a different person may have caved a lot earlier. And I think that you and I probably can perceive the wandering of his mind happening in those instances you just raised. So I think the jury is perceptive to that. No doubt they've been watching him very closely, and any kind of variations on the way he's presenting himself are going to be things that they're going to be looking at very closely, not just the words that he's saying, but the way that he says it. And so I think you raise a good point there.
Here's the question I have, Adam. For me, up to this point, it's been pretty clear that this defendant is not someone who really has a great relationship with the truth. Now, that being the case, what does the jury do? Do those lies put him in the light that, well, then he must be guilty since he's telling all these lies? Or is it such that the jury is going to look at it and say, he's telling all these lies, let's just get rid of everything he says and let's look at the rest of the evidence, and has the prosecution proven their case? How do you think that works with the jury when they're going back and deliberating on a case like this?
Yeah, it depends on their own life experiences, but generally, a jury is not going to like somebody that lies to them. On the other hand, he was almost candid in the fact that he said he would lie, to save himself. Not a lot of people would say that. And so it's difficult to assess what kind of impact that would have. But I think at the end of the day, a jury still is not going to be happy with a person that is lying to them, given the circumstances.
Well, here's my question. Are they happy with the prosecutor in this case? Because what we've seen from the prosecutor, and I think, again, he's sort of getting to the point today, but he's been relatively all over the place for the last 4 days or so. He's been digging in on this. It almost seems personal. And I'm wondering if that's something that might put off the jury and put Durst in a little bit better light.
It could. Does it tip the scales? Probably not. I think that this particular prosecutor has a ton of investment into this case over the years and the preparation that's gone into it. And so it would be difficult to divorce your own emotions and personality from it entirely. I think that he can save a lot of that in his summation to the jury, the closing argument, say, you know,
All right, our signal froze there, but that's fine. I'm keeping my eye on the courtroom. They are not coming back in just yet. But as I've mentioned before, Lewin is finally starting to ask questions about Durst's longtime friend, Susan Berman, the woman whose murder is at the center of this case. Of course, prosecutors say Durst killed Berman in order to stop her from going to authorities with what she knew about what really happened to Kathy Durst. Now, Durst's testimony regarding Susan Berman is our testimony of the day. So let's take a look at some of his testimony regarding what he told her and what he wouldn't have told her. Let's listen.
Would you agree that despite her loyalty, that Susan definitely had a bit of a big mouth?
I don't see that her loyalty had anything to do with whether or not she always made up stories. But she did always make up stories.
Motion to strike is non-responsive.
Stricken.
Mr. Durst, what I'm asking you is, this isn't a question about whether she made up stories. I'm merely asking you, and let me make it easy, could Susan have a big mouth?
Susan had a big mouth. Your terminology is big mouth, not mine.
Okay, what would your terminology be?
She told stories.
So would you agree, Mr. Durst, that if you had a choice and you were going to pick somebody that you wanted to confess a crime to, that Susan, because of her big mouth, would not have been the ideal choice? Would you agree?
This is another one of your hypotheticals. If I wanted to commit a crime, I would have had to have committed a crime.
So, Mr. Durst, my question is, you heard, for instance, and you referred to it, I think you referred to it in your testimony with Mr. DeGuerin, that even Steve Silverman said, and he testified to this, that Susan Berman was the last person you would want to confess a murder to. Do you agree with that statement by Mr. Silverman?
Would Susan be the last person that I would want to confess a murder to? I guess you would be the last person I would want to confess a murder to.
Fair. Would you agree, though, since I wasn't your best friend, even now I don't think I am, would you agree that Susan Berman, as your best friend, even though she was someone you cared about, and even though she was somebody that was very loyal, that if you had told her a secret, such as confessing to murder, that you would have been very concerned about her ability to keep that quiet?
Anything I said to Susan would be something that Susan might talk about.
And you would have been aware of that from the time you would have told her, correct? In other words, this isn't an observation that you're coming up with in 2000. You would have known this back in 1982 as well, correct?
Yes, my memory of Susan now is pretty much the same as in 1982.
So would you agree, Mr. Durst, that if you assume that Susan had a secret that could get you into trouble, that you would be concerned that eventually that secret was going to come out, am I correct?
Susan was not good at keeping secrets.
By the way, Mr. Balian has asked me to ask you the following question. If I'm the last person you would want to confess to, et cetera, why were you trying to confess to me to make a plea deal?
I was trying to make a plea deal.
Okay. Would you agree that Susan could be an extremely manipulative person?
No. Well, maybe. And there are some people who she could manipulate. Like she could manipulate Nick Shaven.
All right, it looks like things are getting going again, so I want to take you back out live to that courtroom in Los Angeles County.
You may resume your questions.
Mr. Durst, you're aware that in the statements that Susan Berman gave to the individuals that I discussed, that she didn't tell them all what you characterize as the same lie. Would you agree? There were differences.
Yes. They are the same.
Can you repeat that? I'm sorry. One of these days I'll remember to turn it on.
There were substantial differences in what those people testified to that Susan Berman had said.
Well, let me ask you, Mr. Durst, you would agree that the statement to Miriam Barnes was that Susan had done something for you and that if anything happened to her, Bobby did it. That's what Miriam Barnes testified to, correct?
Correct.
You agree that Lorraine Newman testified that, again, Susan had done something for you to provide you with an alibi for Kathy's disappearance, correct?
Correct.
Linda Ope said that Susan told her that she had called Einstein Medical School pretending to be Kathy, correct?
Correct.
Mela Kaufman testified that Susan told her that she had called the medical school pretending to be Kathy, correct?
I thought Kaufman's testimony was much more complex than that.
No, I'm not giving the whole thing. I'm just saying that she said that, among other things, that in the end, Susan had told her that she, Susan, had called the medical school pretending to be Kathy. So she didn't use the words Albert Einstein with Mela Kaufman. Mela Kaufman said she called the medical school pretending to be Kathy, correct?
I thought Mela Kaufman's testimony was more complex than just that Susan said, I called the medical center.
No, so let me be clear. I'm not saying that it wasn't more complex. I'm saying that, among other things, Mela testified that Susan told her that she called the medical school pretending to be Kathy, correct?
Correct.
And Susie Harmon didn't mention anything about Susan calling the medical school. She said that regarding Kathy's disappearance, that there had been a fight and that Kathy fell down the stairs, correct?
I might have it confused. I'll accept that she's the one who said Kathy fell down the stairs.
So would you agree, Mr. Durst, that given how bright Susan is, that it's not that she couldn't remember what the story was, it's that she chose to tell different people different things? Would you agree?
I would imagine she probably more or less remembered more or less what she told different people. Why she chose to tell them different stories would be just something in Susan's personality.
Would you agree then, Mr. Durst, that all the questions by your attorneys that went to, for instance, with Lorraine Newman about her drug use and if she was lying, or Linda Obst about why she didn't come forward earlier, or Mela Kaufman about are you sure you heard what you heard, you would now say that all those questions, Mr. Durst, your position is that you're not disputing that those witnesses were testifying to exactly what Susan told them, correct?
Oh, I'm not going to go there. Exactly what Susan told them. One of the people, maybe Steve Silverman, said, when you have a conversation with Susan Berman, you listen. Susan Berman would talk and talk and talk.
Now, my question, though, Mr. Durst, is as an example, there was a lot of cross-examination with Lorraine Newman regarding her drug use and how that affected her memory. Do you recall that cross-examination?
Sort of.
Am I correct that your position now is not that there was anything wrong with Lorraine Newman's memory at all, it's that what she is repeating that Susan told her was a lie, correct?
What Susan told each of those people was a lie.
Right, but their testimony regarding their memory of what Susan told them, you're not disputing that at all now. You're basically saying kind of junk in, junk out, correct?
I think Susan talked a lot and very quickly. And whether they remembered everything that Susan said is questionable.
So, Mr. Durst, since the break, are you now kind of backing away from the statement you said a little while ago where you agreed that these witnesses, you had no issue with their truth or their memory? Your position was Susan was lying when she told them that, not that these witnesses had any problem with their truth or their memory. Are you now backing away from that position?
No, I'm not backing away with that from position.
So that still reflects your belief, is that correct?
My belief is that Susan made up stories and told lots of people stories.
And those witnesses came into court and they accurately repeated the stories. It's just that what they're repeating is false. That's your position, right?
Well, now this is what the lady psychologist reported about how people's memories change over time. So I'm not saying that Miriam Barnes or Lorraine Newman purposely lied, but I am saying I'm not willing to accept that they remembered exactly what Susan said, because Susan would take a long time in any conversation.
And what I'm asking you, Mr. Durst, is not whether they remember the exact words, but so as an example, you're not disputing now that Susan Berman told Linda Obst, I called Einstein Medical School pretending to be Kathy. Your position, am I correct, is that yes, Susan Berman told Linda Obst that or something very similar, but when Susan Berman said it, she was lying. Is that correct?
I've got the following question.
Yeah,
I didn't hear the answer.
everything that Susan Berman said about providing an alibi for me or calling Albert Einstein was a lie.
Right, but listen to my question. But you're not saying that the witnesses in coming in here and repeating what she told them, you're not saying, first of all, that they're lying, correct?
I am not saying that any of the witnesses lied.
And you're also not saying that any of the witnesses were mistaken regarding the substance of what they're saying, correct?
You see, I am saying that a little bit because I remember my conversations with Susan Berman would go for a long time and she would talk at length. I always found it very hard to pay attention to what Susan was saying.
Well, Mr. Durst, do you really think that these witnesses were having a hard time paying attention to Susan telling them that she helped cover up a murder?
Overly broad, what witnesses?
Vague.
What was that, Your Honor?
He said overly broad, which is a way of saying vague, and I'll sustain that.
Okay, Mr. Durst, what I'm asking you is, gosh, I just forgot what my question was.
You ask him all the witnesses.
Mr. Durst, could I have the question read back? And I apologize if the court has it right
Will
there.
you please?
I apologize.
Well, objection was sustained to the question.
No,
Did it, should be,
I don't think this question was sustained.
objection was sustained.
No, it was overly broad, it was vague, so he's going to hear you need to hear the question in order to rephrase it.
Thank
I
you,
think that's
Your
what's going on. She's rereading it to him so he can rephrase it.
Well, Mr. Durst, do you really think that these witnesses were having a hard time paying attention to Susan telling them that she helped cover up a murder?
So don't
I got
answer
it.
that.
Mr.
Ask a new
Durst,
question.
would you agree that Susan Berman discussing that she had helped cover up a murder is a pretty significant area of conversation? Would you agree?
Yes,
So is it your position then that the witnesses weren't really paying attention and aren't sure what she said?
yes, I can remember my conversations with Susan Berman, whereby in the same conversation, she would talk about the dog's operation, what she made for dinner, what Niles Brenner had said when she tried to get him into bed, and how Mella was doing at school, all in the same conversation.
Did she ever talk to you about covering up any murders during a conversation with her?
No,
Don't you think, Mr. Durst, that if she had, you'd remember?
she was under the impression that her father had been murdered, and she had gotten a freedom of information.
Motion to strike is non-responsive.
Overruled.
That wasn't the question I asked you, Mr. Durst.
What did you ask me?
Did she ever discuss with you, did she ever say to you, hey, you know what, Bob, I helped cover up a murder?
She never said that to me.
Had she said that to you, don't you think that's something you would clearly remember?
It depends what the context of it was. There was much that Susan said to me that I thought was just a big story.
So I'm not asking you whether you would believe it. I'm asking you if you would remember it.
Maybe and maybe not.
Okay, I want to go back to your sailboat. You said that the sailboat was being taken to the dump. Who was taking the sailboat to the dump? May strike that. The sailboat was being taken to the dump by the Weiner kid, is that correct?
I had asked Barry Weiner to take the sailboat to the dump
Why was the sailboat being taken to the dump?
because the sailboat was rotting.
But isn't that the same sailboat that you ended up selling to Bill Mayer?
No, when I sold that, the sailboat, I had bought 2 sailboats. First one was rotting away, and I wanted taken to the dump. The second one was in pretty good shape when I sold the South Salem house.
Mr. Durst, isn't it true that there's never been discussion about anything more than one sailboat, and you just realized right now that you made a boo-boo and tried to cover it up by now bringing up a second boat that doesn't exist? Isn't that what just happened?
Object to the comment.
Overruled.
Everything you just said is untrue.
What kind of boat, what was the sailboat? You gave the brand. What was the sailboat that you were having the Weiner kid?
They're called sailfishes. They're the littlest sailboat they make, but they were perfect for Lake Truesdale, which was a small lake, and you were not allowed to have a gas motor on it. It came with a rudder and a main sail and a jib sail.
Isn't that-
One person could sail it, and it could hold 4 people.
Isn't that the same kind of boat that you sold to Bill Mayer?
I was not aware that I had sold the boat to Bill Mayer. I thought that when I sold the house, I left the sailboat for the buyer.
Okay, so that wasn't the question I asked. That was whether you sold it to Bill Mayer, as he testified, or whether you left it for the buyer. That's the exact boat, the same kind of boat that you were saying you had before that you told the Weiner kid to take to the dump, correct?
It was the same kind of boat. The boat was made out of balsa wood with stretched canvas. And if you dragged it up on the shore a few times, the canvas would get scraped and the balsa wood would get waterlogged.
My question, though, Mr. Durst, is that is the same brand, the same kind of boat that you sold to Bill Mayer. In other words, your testimony is you had 2 of the exact same kind of boats. Is that correct?
Correct.
And would you agree, Mr. Durst, that before your testimony 5 minutes ago, you'd never mentioned that you had 2 different boats, correct?
I don't agree to that at all, and I don't remember selling the boat to Bill Mayer.
You heard,
Everybody on the lake had the same kind of boat.
you heard Bill Mayer's testimony. Do you have any reason to doubt that that testimony was accurate? You heard him say he bought the boat from you and he still has it today.
I don't remember him saying he bought the boat. I don't doubt that he bought the boat.
So let's talk about Barry Weiner for a second. Again, can you tell me, to the best of your memory, exactly how old was he in 1982?
He was 18.
And he was a senior or a junior in high school?
Correct.
Well, he can't be both. Was he a junior or a senior in high school?
I thought you asked me if he was a senior in high school, and the answer is he was a senior in high school.
And I assume he was going to the local high school, correct? And you said that you had asked him to rent a car or a truck. Is that correct?
He had to rent a pickup truck.
Mr. Durst, are you aware of if in 1982, if individuals who were under 25 were allowed to rent vehicles?
I have no idea.
Well, Mr. Durst, if it turned out, I want you to assume for a moment that rental agencies restricted, without somebody signing, individuals who were under 25 from renting vehicles. What would your response be as to how he was going to do that?
To the best of my knowledge, he rented a pickup truck.
No basis for it.
Overruled.
No basis didn't have.
Overruled.
You said he rented a pickup truck. He actually got the pickup truck.
To the best of my knowledge, he rented a pickup truck and he took the sailfish to the town dump.
And this occurred in right after Kathy disappeared. Is that correct?
Yes.
So your wife is missing and you're hiring high school kids to rent trucks to transport your sailboat to the dump. That's where you're spending your time?
When I wrote the note was the week before Kathy went missing.
Now that's a new detail, right? You've never said that before, right?
I've said that repeatedly.
You've said it repeatedly.
That note was one of probably 4 or 5 notes I had made to myself for things I wanted to do in the 2 weeks from February 1st to February 15th.
When did
I
you
had taken off from the office.
when did you make this list?
I think I made it on Friday, the 29th of January.
So you literally remember the date you made the list today. Is that correct?
Well, that Friday was my last day in the office, and I had written several notes for things I wanted to do during the next 2 weeks. What has been turned up is one of them.
How well did you know Barry Weiner?
He was the kid who mowed the lawn. I paid him something like $10 a month to mow the lawn and take care of the planting.
How well did you know him?
I'm going to tell you again that he was the kid who mowed the lawn. How well would I possibly know him?
Well, since I wasn't there, that's why I'm asking. How well did you know Barry Weiner?
I know that he mowed the lawn.
How long did he mow the lawn for you?
I think he worked for us for about 5 years.
And did you know his family at all?
I never met a family member.
I want to play for you, Mr. Durst, the first time that you mentioned Barry in direct examination. Can you play that, please, Mr. Henderson? Have we already marked this or no?
This will be equals 311, transcript 311A. This is video from Mr. Durst, August 11th testimony.
I called up the high school student who was used to.
Rewind, please.
I called up the high school student who was used to taking care of the outside of our house, mowed the lawn and did the trimmings on the bushes and the trees, and took care of the plantings and everything. His name was Barry Weiner. I reminded Barry Weiner that he was supposed to rent a pickup truck to take the sailboat. It's called a sailfish. That's the model of it. That had come with the house and was waterlogged and falling apart. I asked Barry to rent the truck, get some of his friends, and take the sailfish to the town dump. I also asked him to go to the hardware store and buy several snow shovels, because we did not have, actually we did have snow shovels, but they were stolen. So at that point I had no snow shovel.
Is it important to have snow shovels there in South Salem during the winter?
Stop it. Mr. Durst, when you were first asked, you didn't mention anything about either dig or bridge, did you?
I answered his question.
Well, no, Mr. Durst, you were explaining what the list was about, and in explaining what the list was about, do you agree you did not mention either dig or bridge, correct?
I think I was specifically asked about the town dump.
Would you agree, Mr. Durst, that forgetting about what the note actually means, but if somebody's wife had disappeared, I want you to assume someone's wife disappeared, and the husband writes a note shortly after it's found that says town dump, bridge, dig, boat, other, shovel, check, car, truck, rent. Would you agree, Mr. Durst, that that sounds like possibilities of how you could get rid of a body? Would you agree?
I would not agree.
By the way, you said you've known Barry for 5 years, correct?
About, yes.
Yeah, you couldn't remember his name, though. You first called him Weiner, and for the last hour, I've been calling him Barry Weiner, and you've been calling him Barry Weiner. You forgot the name you gave him, didn't you?
Excuse me, that's a comment, an argument. I object upon the question.
Overruled.
I'm not sure what the question is.
Well, Mr. Durst, you originally called him Barry Weiner. And now, today, you've been calling him Barry Weiner yourself and answering that his name was Barry Weiner. And this is someone you've known for 5 years. How can you explain that?
Barry Weiner, Barry Weiner? That's not the same to you?
So, Mr. Durst, so if someone called you, someone said your name was Robert Durst, D-U-R-B-S-T, would that be the same as Robert Durst? Would that be a different name?
Well, Durst is with D-U-R-S-T. D-U-R-B-S is a different name.
So, Mr. Durst, are you telling me that you think the name Weiner and the name Weiner are the same name?
Yes.
So, Mr. Durst, which is it? Was his name Barry Weiner or was it Barry Weiner? You don't seem to be able to make up your mind.
Object to that comment.
Sustained.
Which was it?
I am sure he would have answered to either Barry Weiner or Barry Weiner.
What was his name? Which was it? He worked for you for 5 years.
I think I probably called him Barry Weiner sometimes, and Barry Weiner other times, and mostly I just called him Barry.
Was his dad's name, was it Oscar Meyer?
Oh, come on. Yeah.
Mr. Lewin?
Is it Weiner or Weiner, Mr. Durst?
No, I've admonished him not to do that.
Is it Weiner or is it Weiner? Which is it?
I think I used both pronunciations.
Does it make
Sorry?
sense, Mr. Durst, to be calling somebody by a name that is not their correct name? Is that what you do?
It's the same.
Mr. Durst, if Weiner and Weiner were the same, then wouldn't they sound the same? They're different names, correct?
They're the same name.
Okay, let me move on. Would you agree that you are extremely thrifty with your money? You're cheap.
There have been times in my life when I have been cheap.
Your brother said on a scale of 1 to 100, with 1 being as cheap as possible, Tom said you would be a negative 50. Do you agree or disagree with that?
I would not agree with that.
You have referred to your...
This is the brother that hates me.
Well, you said the brother that hates you. Wouldn't it be brothers that hate you? It's both, right?
Well, Douglas hates me. I think Tom just doesn't like me.
Okay. So, would you agree, Mr. Durst, that you've also referred to yourself as being very cheap, correct?
I have referred to myself as being very cheap, mostly when Andrew asked me to say I was very cheap.
So, okay, so what you're saying is you have referred to yourself as being very cheap, but you're not really very cheap? Is that what you're saying now? Is that correct?
Sometimes I've been very cheap. Other times I've been just ordinary cheap. And sometimes I've been extravagant.
Generally speaking, with other people, Mr. Durst, you are cheap or very cheap. You are not extravagant. Is that correct?
What is the... I don't know what the question is.
With your friends, Mr. Durst, aren't you typically either cheap or very cheap and not extravagant?
Depends on what period of my life we're talking about and which friends we're talking about.
All right, let's talk about collect calls. You agree that you always called into work collect, is that right?
No.
RD 123, 12-12-10, page 262, line 17 to page
This is
263.
more Andrew.
Page 263, line 1. Let me play it and then you can comment.
That's correct. This is the 2010 Andrew interview, People's 269, page 37.
So someone said that you used to call the office collect.
Oh, all the time.
Tell me about that.
I would call the office collect.
Why did you do that?
I didn't want to pay for it. Let Seymour pay for it. The only reason I'm calling is because he wants me to call.
You would agree, Mr. Durst, that in that clip you were saying that you always called the office collect, correct?
I did not always call the office collect.
Mr. Durst, isn't it true that only you and family members would have their collect calls to the Durst organization accepted?
Quite the contrary. Numerous people called collect.
You heard Douglas Durst's testimony on April 13, 2014, where he said that the only people that would be accepted who worked for the Durst organization at that time were you and he. Do you recall that testimony?
I don't think that's what he said.
April 13, 2014, page 38, lines 9 through 16, he was asked, based on what was going on at that time, is there, first of all, would that be consistent with who would be able to make collect calls that would be accepted to the group? Answer, Bob and me. Question, anybody else? No audible response. Is that no? Answer, that's a no. No. Do you disagree with that statement?
Yes.
Who else would have their collect calls accepted?
Well, the thing of it was, whoever was running the switchboard could accept collect calls from whoever they wanted to accept collect calls from.
Well, except for you would agree that whoever's running the switchboard, the people at the Durst organization know who that is, and if they're accepting collect calls from people that are not authorized to be having their calls accepted, that switchboard operator is going to be in trouble, correct?
No.
You were present for the testimony of your brothers, Tom and Douglas, is that correct?
I was present.
Each of them described incidents near Cassie's disappearance where she separately told them that you were stealing from the family business. Do you recall those allegations?
I recall the allegations.
Would you agree, Mr. Durst, that if you were aware that she was making such allegations, whether they were true or not, that that would potentially be a motive for you to be very upset with her?
Cassie was saying all kinds of things.
So you were aware at the time that she was saying that you were stealing from your family's organization, correct?
She said that over a long period of time to various people. Nobody listened to her.
I'm going to come back to this in a second, Mr. Durst. I want to talk about gifts to your friends. You heard your brothers, Tom and Douglas, both testify that you don't give away your money unless you have a selfish motivation. Did you hear that testimony?
No.
I want you to assume that both of your brothers testified to that. Do you agree that that's accurate?
I don't know how they would possibly know
Would you agree?
what I do with my money. And there's been plenty of evidence suggesting that I gave Susan Berman a lot of money.
Well, Mr. Durst, you would agree that if in fact Susan Berman had made the call for you in 1982, she had you over a barrel and you would pretty much have to give her whatever she wanted, correct?
I would not agree with that. And I gave her money all during our relationship, long before Kathy disappeared.
Mr. Durst, would you agree that you are not someone to give lavish gifts to your friends? Would you agree?
I would not agree with that. No.
Did you ever give Nick Chabin a gift?
I would never give Nick Chabin a gift, but I think Emily and Stuart Altman testified that I gave them a car.
You gave them a car, Mr. Durst, when you were aware that Emily Altman knew that you had been in Los Angeles at the time, information that she was hiding and eventually ended up admitting during the pendency of this case, correct?
One other question.
Overruled.
No, not correct.
Isn't it true, Mr. Durst, that in fact, Emily Altman's admission during her testimony that you had told her that you were in Los Angeles at the time of the murder was probably the key piece of evidence in this case that has now put you in the position where you have to admit you wrote the cadaver note, correct?
Sustained.
I thought
Sustained.
during
It was sustained, Mr. Durst.
your interview,
Sustained, Mr.
Emily
Durst.
Altman,
Judge sustained the objection.
I'm waiting on the judge.
No,
he
I
sustained
sustained it. Don't answer.
Mr. Durst, you were sitting in the courtroom when Emily Altman testified that you had told her you were in Los Angeles at the time of Susan's murder, correct?
I was sitting in the courtroom and I heard Emily Altman spending most of her time, quote unquote, crying her eyes out. I thought you did a pretty good job of making it clear that Emily Altman was a highly unreliable witness.
Mr. Durst, Emily Altman said that you were in Los Angeles at the time of the murder, correct?
Emily Altman, in response to your question, Emily Altman, ma'am, do you know if Robert Durst was in Southern California, Los Angeles, when Susan Berman was murdered? And Emily Altman swallowed the bait whole and announced that Robert Durst was in Southern California, in Los Angeles, staying at the Beverly Hills Hilton Hotel.
Mr. Durst, up until that moment, for 17 years, you had said repeatedly that you were not in Los Angeles. Is that correct?
Well past that moment.
Correct. And you had said this under oath. You'd committed perjury to escape the idea that you were in Los Angeles at the time of Susan's murder, correct?
I repeatedly stated, both before Emily Altman made her stupid statement and after Emily Altman made her stupid statement, that I was in Northern California when Susan Berman was murdered.
You're calling it a stupid statement, Mr. Durst, but you've now agreed that stupid statement that you were, in fact, that you told her you were in Los Angeles at the time of Susan's murder is true, correct?
But not that I was staying at the Beverly Hills Hilton Hotel. Emily Altman just made that up on the spur of the moment.
So, Mr. Durst, again, you would agree that right up until that time and even afterward, you had sworn under oath I was never in Los Angeles, and then Emily Altman, in what you said was a, quote, stupid statement, testified that you had admitted to her you were in Los Angeles. That's what happened, correct?
I lied about being in Southern California right up until whenever my lawyers stipulated that I had written the cadaver note.
Right, and between the time that you told Emily that you were in Los Angeles and the time where she admitted to it in 2017, you would agree that she possessed a very damning piece of evidence. Is that correct?
Emily Altman guessed, and she guessed that I was staying at the quote-unquote Beverly Hills Hilton Hotel.
Mr. Durst, isn't it true? I don't want to talk about the Beverly Hills Hilton. Did you?
That's what she said. No wonder you don't want to talk about it.
Mr. Durst, did you tell Emily Altman that you were in Los Angeles at the time of Susan's
No, I
murder?
would not tell Emily Altman that.
So your testimony is that it turns out you were in Los Angeles at the time of the murder, but you never told Emily Altman that. Is that your testimony?
Correct.
Mr. Durst, would you agree that the fact that you gave Stuart and Emily Altman a very expensive Lexus between the time she alleges that you told her this damning information and the time when she revealed it, that could be taken by someone looking at it as an effort to keep her happy and quiet?
No.
So you don't believe that a person looking at the situation could say, well, Emily Altman has this damaging information, and I don't want that information to come out, so I'm going to buy she and her husband a very expensive Lexus. You don't think it would be reasonable to say, gosh, that almost sounds like a bribe?
I think if you were paying attention to my telephone calls,
Oh, I pay attention to your telephone calls, trust me.
so you heard me tell Stuart Altman.
Mr. Lewin, I've told you not to comment like that on a witness's testimony. Just ask questions.
Understood, Your Honor.
You heard me tell Stuart Altman that his wife was acting like a babbling idiot. And Stuart Altman said that I was being too tough on her, that you had given her the most difficult cross-examination he had ever heard. At which point, I reminded Stuart Altman, the attorney, that you had not cross-examined Emily Altman, but that it was on direct testimony that she was acting like a babbling idiot.
Mr. Durst, when you've talked about Emily Altman acting like a babbling idiot, or when you've criticized her testimony, you would agree what you have not said is that Emily Altman was lying, correct?
If I did not say she was lying, I'll say it now. Emily Altman was lying. I did not stay at the Beverly Hills Hilton Hotel.
Mr. Durst, would you agree that the big significance of Emily Altman's testimony is not where you said you stayed, but the fact that you were in Los Angeles, in Beverly Hills, at the time that Susan Berman was murdered?
There, Emily Altman answered your question. Emily Altman, I'll bet you don't even know if Robert Durst was in Southern California, in Los Angeles, when Susan Berman was murdered. And Emily Altman assured you that she did know that I was in Southern California, in Los Angeles, staying at the Beverly Hills Hilton Hotel.
Mr. Durst, Emily Altman, you would agree, did not testify that you were staying at the Beverly Hilton. She testified that's what you said. Is that correct?
Clarification, is that what you said, or is that correct?
No,
He asked if that's what he asked.
Yeah, but it's ambiguous, what's the question mean?
Question's very clear, Your Honor.
Yeah, I understood it. That's, yes, overruled.
Emily Altman testified that I was in Southern California, in Los Angeles, staying at the Beverly Hills Hilton Hotel, which I was not. She kind of got the name wrong. There's the Beverly Hills Hotel and there's the Beverly Hilton. They're different places. She managed to lump it all together and call it one hotel.
Mr. Durst, my question is, Emily Altman testified, correct, not where you were staying. She testified to what you told her. Is that correct?
She testified that I was in Southern California, in Los Angeles, staying at the Beverly Hills Hilton Hotel. It had nothing to do with what I told her. She stated it as a fact.
Mr. Durst, didn't she in fact testify that she spoke to you and you told her that that's what happened? Isn't that what happened?
No, she did not say Bob told me that he was in Southern California in Beverly Hills, staying at the Beverly Hills Hilton Hotel. Emily Altman just stated it as a fact.
You said she mixed up the Beverly Hills Hotel and the Beverly Hilton Hotel. What did you mean by that?
Well, they're two different hotels. There's the Beverly Hills Hotel, and there's the Beverly Hilton.
Well, when you say she mixed it up, Mr. Durst, are you saying that in fact you didn't tell her you were staying at the Beverly Hilton, that you told her you were staying at the Beverly Hills Hotel? Is that what that means?
I'm saying that she did not know what she was talking about. And she just, in her response to you, lumped the two hotels, not knowing that they were two hotels. She said he was staying at the Beverly Hills Hilton Hotel, which is the name of no hotel.
So it's your position, Mr. Durst, that there was not a Beverly Hills Hilton Hotel? Is that your position?
My position is that there's a Beverly Hills Hotel and a Beverly Hilton Hotel.
So when she said you were staying at the Beverly Hills Hilton Hotel, can you tell me how that would mean she mixed up anything, unless what you're saying is you told her you were staying not at the Beverly Hills Hilton Hotel, but the Beverly Hills Hotel?
I did not tell her that I was in Southern California. I did not tell her I was in Los Angeles. And I did not tell her that I was staying at the Beverly Hills Hilton Hotel. Emily Altman managed to babble all of that on her own.
But Mr. Durst, you're now saying that in fact you were in Beverly Hills at Susan's house. So how did Emily know that if she was just babbling?
I am not saying I was in Beverly Hills. I am saying that I arrived at Susan Berman's house on Benedict Canyon before the killer had left, and that I promptly myself left.
Well, I want to stop you. So now you're saying that the killer was actually in the house when you were there?
I believe the killer was either still in the house or in the yard when I arrived.
Mr. Durst, haven't you testified that Susan's body was cold?
I did not testify that Susan's body was cold.
Do you have it ready to go or not? I think they call that a cliffhanger. We can do this tomorrow, Your Honor?
We have the clip.
Oh, do we have it?
Yeah, I don't think it's a good cliffhanger.
Play it.
Yeah, RD 746,
It's later on in the outline. Sorry.
312, 312A.
Thank you.
I put my hand over her face. I might have left that out to see if she was breathing, see if I could feel breath, and it felt cold.
Well, what do you have to say about that?
Her breath felt, her face felt cold.
She's dead. What do you mean her breath felt cold? Was she breathing on you when you got there?
No, she was not breathing.
So how can her breath be cold when she's dead? She's a stiff.
I put my hand on her face, and it was cold.
So Mr. Durst, let's go back to what I said a moment ago. You said the killer was in the house. I asked you, well, Mr. Durst, didn't you say that Susan's body was cold? You said, no, I never said that. Now you're saying that Susan's body was cold, correct?
I'm not saying her body was cold.
So what was cold, Mr. Durst? Let me stop you. Do you
Okay.
agree she can't breathe on you? Would you agree?
Her face was cold.
Her face was cold.
Correct.
So you believe that her face would have been a different temperature than the rest of her body?
I have no idea.
So the part of her body, well, you picked her up by the arms and the hands. Remember you're saying you lifted her 6 inches off the ground?
Correct.
She was cold, wasn't she?
Her face felt cold.
What did her arms and hands feel like when you picked her up?
When I lifted her up by her arms, I did not feel it was cold.
But you said her face was cold, correct?
Correct.
If her face was cold, Mr. Durst, would you agree that even though you're not a forensic pathologist, that would indicate she'd been dead for some period of time? Would you agree?
I don't know whether a period of time is 5 minutes or an hour or 2 hours.
So it's your position that she might have been only dead for 5 minutes, her face is cold, and that the killer is still in the house. Is that what you're telling this jury?
Correct.
We can start again tomorrow, Your Honor.
Yes. Tomorrow. 9 o'clock. Do not converse among yourselves or with anyone else on any subject connected with this case. Do not form or express any opinion on the case.
All right, well, court has adjourned for the day, and I think it's fair to say things are not going well right now for Robert Durst. Let me bring in my guest for this hour. Joining me now in Atlanta, Georgia, criminal defense attorney Melanie Lagrone. Melanie, great to see you again. Thanks for being on the show.
Great to be on the show, and good to see you again, Michael.
All right, so Melanie, this I was watching you. I could see you in the monitor and some of the faces you were making. And basically, they mirrored the faces I was making. Clearly, this is kind of going off the rails here for Robert Durst.
I don't even know what to say. Yes, it's completely going off the rails for him, but I don't know, even I guess maybe listening to the prosecutor and how he's just kind of laying into him. You know, at the end of the day, a lot of questions were asked and answered. He said, no, he never told Emily Altman, you know, that he was staying in Los Angeles or Southern California. And he just kept digging and digging and digging. And although Robert Durst has lied, I guess, multiple times, and he's even admitted to it, I still wonder how the jury thinks about this. Like, what are their perception of how the prosecutor is going in on him? You know, because we look at him as this feeble old man who's dying. And, you know, my heart, even sitting here, was like, it was kind of dropping because I could picture that being like my grandfather. So I'm just wondering how the jurors are taking all of this in and what they're feeling about this.
I understand completely what you're saying because I have the same sentiments. There are times during this cross-examination where I find myself rooting for Robert Durst because the prosecutor comes off as so arrogant and just really tearing into him for just the purpose of tearing into him. It almost seems like he just wants to bring him down. So there is a sense of sympathy for Robert Durst. But the lies just keep coming, and you kind of see him trying to make up for one lie, then he comes up with another. All the different people pointed out by the prosecution are either misremembering or perhaps making stuff up, and the only one who's perhaps being honest is him. That's what Robert Durst wants this jury to believe. I think there's been so many lies pointed out, so many absurd lies pointed out. At one point today, he talked about having 2 boats. All of a sudden, he went from 1 boat to 2 boats, 2 of the same boats. It just doesn't make any sense anymore. And I think we've gone beyond that point. Again, I agree with you that some of the antics of the prosecutor are questionable, but I think at this point, it's just gone too far.
I agree with you, Michael. I mean, he's just kind of digging a bigger hole for himself. And you know, who knows? But I mean, the prosecutor is getting what he's trying to elicit out of him, and you know, and sometimes I almost think, you know, he's trying to like twist him up and things like that, so then he will backtrack, and you know, so I don't know. It is what it is.
It is what it is, Melanie. What's very clear is that sometimes when Lewin asks a question, you almost know just by the tone of the question that he has waiting right next to him a call for that's basically going to impeach whatever he says. He knows that if even the slightest difference comes out of Robert Durst's mouth, he's going to call for something that he has combed through for the last, I don't know how many hours, going through it to make sure he's ready to impeach anything that he says. And that's basically what we're seeing. And again, it's just not going very well right now for Robert Durst. Again, the question is, what effect is that going to have on the jury? Which actually, we're going to take a break right now, Melanie, so stand by. And that leads us into our question for today. We want to hear from you. Do you think that Durst's testimony is helping him, helping the defense, or the state? That is our talkback topic for today. So I want you to go to Court TV's social media pages and leave your answer. We'll have some of your answers coming up right after this break. And coming up right after this break, we're going to have you first get caught up to speed on day 4 of the federal sex trafficking trial of singer R. Kelly. We'll get a live report from New York after this break, too. So we'll be right here on Court TV. Hello and welcome back to Court TV Live. I'm Michael Ayala. They are done out in Los Angeles County, so we're going to turn our eyes now to day 4 of the federal trial of R&B singer R. Kelly. Today, the jury heard from yet another one of his accusers, and the testimony was wide-ranging and not easy to listen to. Kelly is facing federal sex trafficking and racketeering charges. The prosecution alleges that over a period spanning 3 decades, Kelly ran a criminal enterprise aimed at providing him with women, many underage, whom he abused and trafficked across state lines for his own enjoyment. Now, Kelly denies the accusations and says the relationships were all consensual. Now, on the stand today, a victim known only as Jane Doe number 5 in an effort to protect her identity. Now, Court TV legal correspondent Julia Janae joins us live now from outside that federal courthouse in Brooklyn, New York. Of course, cameras are not allowed in federal courtrooms, but Julia was inside for today's proceedings. All right, Julia. What can you tell us about Jane Doe number 5's testimony?
Michael, Jane Doe number 5, first of all, is going to have to return to the stand tomorrow after most of the day today sharing those really humiliating and demeaning allegations that involve the defendant. She will have to come back for at least an hour more of direct examination. But as far as her demeanor inside the courtroom, she was very matter-of-fact in the way that she shared these details, but she has an almost childlike sound. She's 23 and she was 17 when she first met the defendant, when they started their sexual relationship. She seemed very demure in the way that she was testifying, kept her hands clasped in her lap. She's wearing this really long black shawl and has her hair up in a ponytail bun. But some of the things that she shared were really explosive in the fact that they detailed some things we hadn't heard before. She talked about her own abortion that she says the defendant forced her to get. And in that, we have a little bit from court, a quote, when she talked about R. Kelly revealing to his live-in girlfriends, which she said she was a part of this group, about what happened many years before in 1994 with Aaliyah. She said the defendant had expressed to all of us that Aaliyah was pregnant and that they needed a certificate for her to possibly get an abortion. And aside from her parents, the only person who could go with her was her spouse. Now, there's also a text message that the witness on the stand read for this jury. She had a lot of communications with the defendant that this jury heard about. And this one in particular came from the defendant to Jane Doe number 5, saying, I want to groom you. I want to be bonded with you 1,000,000%. This really pulled back the curtain for what the prosecution's case wants to show to this jury, that this was almost a harem of sorts. There were these women who were fully submitted to Kelly and were willing to do whatever he asked, including some very humiliating and demeaning things.
Yeah, it's really been incredible. And it's interesting that you've described a number of the Jane Does as being more childlike or sounding much younger than their ages. It's almost as if they're trapped back when the trauma took place, which is something we know does in fact happen. Now, Julia, before she took the stand, the defense team finished off their cross-examination of one of R. Kelly's road managers. Tell us about him and what were the highlights of his cross-examination?
Demetrius Smith, a very important witness for count 1, act 1 of the racketeering allegations against Kelly. They say that there was bribery, the prosecution rather, say that the defendant was someone who knowingly or intentionally, either himself or caused someone else to bribe on his behalf to further his criminal enterprise. In this case, Demetrius Smith is someone who knew the defendant back in the 80s, met him first in 1984 when he was 16 years old. He was describing himself as his personal assistant and former tour manager. And he said that he wanted to help him with his career, wanted to really get him involved in the music industry. And over time, that stardom really took off. He was part of Jive Records, and the cross-examination from the defense attorney really tried to get out that this record label tried to show him as a sex symbol, and that perhaps plays a role in all of this. But the key part of Demetrius's testimony is that he was present for the marriage to 15-year-old Aaliyah. Kelly was 27 years old at the time, and he testified that he did bribe someone. He did offer money to a state official to get a fake ID, but he also said that Kelly was not someone who actually directed it, that he didn't ask for a favor or ask him to go and bribe someone. So that may present a challenge for the prosecution trying to connect the actions of Demetrius Smith to the defendant.
All right, Julia, now I want to go to that point that you're mentioning there, the fact that he claims on cross that he wasn't directly asked by R. Kelly. So we're hearing a lot of testimony about things happening to victims, and it's attributed to Kelly, poor treatment, all types of restrictions, bizarre rules. Is it clear from the testimony that the things that were ordered were done directly by Kelly, or is it more that others were acting on his behalf? What's the sense you're getting from some of the testimony?
I think so far we're up to about 8 witnesses. Demetrius Smith's was much different than the other witnesses we've seen. He was someone who knew Kelly from even before the enterprise that the prosecution says was going on. So his testimony did not support the fact that Kelly was the one instructing everything that was happening. But as far as Jane Doe number 5, Anthony Navarro, who also took the stand on Friday, they all talked about Kelly being the one who was orchestrating this. It was his permission that you had to get. Jane Doe number 5 said there were times she wanted to take a shower, there were times she wanted to use the restroom, and because she couldn't get a hold of Kelly himself on the phone, that she wasn't able to do it, even resorting to urinating in a cup because she didn't want to defy his rule of not leaving the room that she was in.
All right, Julia Janae, I want to thank you so much for that report. Right now, I want to bring back in criminal defense attorney Melanie LaGrone and get her thoughts on this case. Melanie, this is a racketeering, a RICO case. They have to prove a criminal enterprise that was headed up by Kelly, that his entourage were in fact acting as a criminal enterprise. I want to get your thoughts on the possibility that prosecution can pull this off.
Well, as of right now, not quite sure, because the way that I'm looking at it is Kelly might have so much influence over these people that they are acting on their own accord because they want to help him, and maybe not necessarily because he told them to do certain things. So I think that might be the challenge. Obviously we've got a lot more testimony to hear, but that would be ultimately the challenge, that, Kelly didn't tell them to do it, but because they are loyal to him and everything that he's doing, they wanted to assist in certain ways on their own.
Yeah, and as we heard from Julia, there's sort of this mix of testimony. Some are saying that things were done directly by Kelly. Others are saying that he didn't directly tell them to do it. It was just kind of understood what he wanted. All right, Melanie, stand by. We're going to take a break right now. And Kelly will be back up again tomorrow. And as you heard from Julia as well, Jane Doe number 5 will be continuing her direct examination. We'll bring you reports from New York tomorrow as well. All right, it is almost time for our Talk Back segment. And our question for today: do you think Robert Durst's testimony is helping his own case or the prosecution's? On Court TV, leave your comment. We'll have some of your answers right after this break, so keep it right here on Court TV. It is time for today's Talkback segment. Now, each day, we post a question on Court TV's social media pages. We gather your comments and questions and respond right here on the show. Now, Robert Durst has been on the stand for 9 days now, testifying in his own defense, and 5 of those days have been on cross-examination. And, well, after today particularly, it doesn't look good, and it looks like Prosecutor John Lewin really is having a field day with him, and he's not going to stop anytime soon. So our question for today is Robert Durst's testimony helping the defense more or the state? All right, I want to bring back in criminal defense attorney Melanie Negron and go to our first comment, which is from Beverly. She says, guilty, guilty, guilty. Just the way he answered the prosecutor's questions. There's no way his smart comments will get him off. He's not funny. He's a killer. All right, Melanie, so, this goes to the heart of what I've been thinking about this case. And I think it's clear, again, by the way he's answering the questions, that he's been telling a lot of lies and he's continuing to try to follow up those lies with more lies. But my question is, how do you think the jury is taking this in? Are they looking at these lies like Beverly is, saying he's guilty because of these lies? Or are they saying, you know what, we can't believe anything he says. This guy Lewin is just trying to catch him in a corner. So let's look at the other evidence, which then I think the prosecution may have a little bit more of a problem.
That's a tough question. I really don't know because, like I said, when I was looking at it, yeah, he was lying and he was kind of backtracking and things like that. But then, in my mind, I started thinking, okay, well, is it because he's sick? And is it because he's on medication and things like that? So I'm sure in the jurors' minds, things like this is going on through their minds as well. Or it could be on the flip side, oh, he's just smug, because it seemed like back in his interviews, back in the day when he was, younger, more spry, that he kind of had that same sort of, kind of flippant kind of, attitude. So they could look at it like that that's just his same demeanor coming out. He really did do this. He's not regretful. And, he's giving it back to the prosecutor like they're giving it to him, basically.
Yeah, I'm in the latter camp, Melanie, just for the record. I think he's the same guy, and he's just getting caught. All right, Austin has our next comment. It may not be helping, but this is the worst cross-examination of a defendant by a prosecutor you will ever see. It's been absolutely terrible, with him lost in obscure details and confusing hypotheticals rather than simple, clear questioning exposing the lies. And Melanie, this goes to what I think you mentioned earlier, the fact that maybe the way Lewin is going about this cross-examination could affect the effectiveness of it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because he's very, he's smug himself, and he's just very into just like getting him and like egging at him and things like that. And it could backfire. At the end of the day, yes, Durst is lying, but as we all know from being in the court ourselves, that the jurors also take into consideration how we act and how our demeanor is towards witnesses and things like that. So I don't think he's doing himself, a good job at pulling out these lies the way he's doing it.
Yeah, at the end of the day, I think he's helping the state. All right, Melanie Negron, thank you so much for being with us. I'm Michael Ayala. It has been a pleasure being with you. Up next, closing arguments with Vinnie Politan. So keep it right here on Court TV.